Hello and welcome to Adesoji Speaks Knowledge, the podcast where I share my thoughts on the insights on various topics as related to Africa. Again, I am your host, Adesoji Iginla, and today I would like to talk about a recent video making the rounds. And the video is one of Erik, the gun for hire, who apparently wants to recolonize Africa and Latin American countries. Why is this important? I hope this episode of Adesoji Speaks Knowledge helps inform his ignorance of the history of Latin America and the African continent. So, to set the stage, I think it's important to put things into context. I would like to share a very short clip. In fact, a 1 minute 57 second clip from Erik Prince's Off the Leash podcast, where he made certain assertions. And suffice to say, let's watch.
Threats to America all across the world.
It's going to be a spicy 2024, and we're still in January.
And it's a superhighway for illegals coming through.
Yeah, look, millions of people have left Venezuela. I understand why they want to, because they don't want to live under a socialist dictatorship hell. And yes, it's easy for them to mix in lots of truly bad terrorist actors in that deluge of people running from bad governance. Look, all this talk of illegal migration in Europe, in the United States, it ultimately comes down to a contest of what is governance. Who is which countries are governed well? And if so many of these countries around the world are incapable of governing themselves, then it's time for us to put the imperial hat back on to say, we're going to govern those countries if you're incapable of governing yourselves, because enough is enough. We're done being invaded.
Because our own national security risk is at stake.
Exactly.
National security interests are at stake.
You can say that about pretty much all of Africa. They're incapable of governing themselves and benefiting their citizens because the governments there are all about looting and pillaging and lining their pockets and going shopping in Paris instead of actually.
All right, hold on a second. Hold on. People on the left are going to watch this. They're going to say, wait a minute, Erik Prince is talking about being a colonialist again.
Absolutely. Yes. Enough. Because if you go to these countries and you see how they suffer under absolutely corrupt, made-up governments that are just criminal syndicates, the people of Africa, the people of Latin America, a lot of them deserve better.
Now, interesting. And I don't even know where to begin, but begin we shall. Now, let me break down let's do it this way. Let me break down that 242 words, I believe, in that clip with a very brief history lesson of both continents. As I feel, this ought to be a teachable moment. Yes. Okay. Let's begin. In a 1994 interview with the Paris Review, Chinua Achebe once said that until the lions have their own historians, the history of the hunt will always glorify the hunter, which is an example of what you've just heard Mr. Prince say there. Essentially, whitewash history, giving you a palatable take. Question is, why is this proverb important? You might be tempted to ask. Well, it's because we've just seen what the West does very well, which is silence the past. And these tactics have existed from time immemorial, from books like The Africa That Never Was, all the diaries of the intrepid traveler discovering places on the continent, And again, this is part of a conspiracy of the powerful to deny, erase important aspects of local and international history. And this is not lost on anyone. I cite the words of Chimamanda Adichie, who advised us against the single story problem. What is the single story? Well, in her words, the single story, she says, creates stereotypes that are often not true, they're largely incomplete, and they make the one story the only story. I hope I paraphrase the words very well. So, it's also important to put into context, why does the West deny history? Well, it denies history because it's a convenient way to go around using such words as enough is enough, we are done being invaded, as a rallying cry to scaring its local population with the usual stereotypes. Here they come again. They are rapists. What did he say? There are terrorists in that group, which is a way to not only manufacture hate, using the usual medium. In this case, now everybody has a microphone. But back in the day, it used to be newspapers, radios, and televisions that are used to build up that picture of the scary person in the Western media in order to justify conquest. In this case, he's actually talking about recolonization and the exploitation of Africa. Again, we've heard this story before. Before, it used to be, let's go and civilize those savages. Now, Mr. Prince gives us a new one. Proper governance, he calls it. But Africans and Latin Americans do know what these words mean. In the cases of places like Kenya, Africa, civilizing means Namibia, Congo, Zimbabwe, Kenya. And for those who don't know, these are sites of some gruesome genocidal killings. And now we're talking about proper governance. Congo is still an ongoing issue. Libya has basically been bombed into oblivion. We're going to govern this country, he says, which is essentially how mass media is used to not only manufacture content. I mean, the interest of elites is front and center whenever you hear all this thing come up. Anybody remember the pretext for the March 2011 invasion of Libya? So this thing is a recurrent trend. The only difference is the words used, but the language, the tone, the nuance is all the same. I mean, I'll give you another one. He says, it is time to put the imperial hat back on. Mr. Prince, when was the hat ever off? That's the question for the West. Imperialism is what they do. It's the very nature of what they are. It's empire. I mean, if Mr. Prince doesn't know, surely it means the US has been very successful at hiding its empire from the likes of Mr. Prince. I mean, if he doesn't know, and I think largely his audience as well might not know, but those outside of the United States know the extent of what United States global power is. Here's a country with over 750, and I repeat the word, 750 military bases. That is more bases than there are United Nations members. which explains why the US, dominates global politics, but does it very, very quietly, while maintaining that American belief that, they in no shape, in form, have imperialism as part of the agenda. But jokes aside, history has not been kind to those who have borne the brunt of this US imperialism. Latin Americans, for now, are not traveling treacherous routes to the US border for no reason. We just need to look back in time. The 50s, the 60s, the 1970s. Surely we didn't miss the Banana Wars, which literally played out in the US backyard. I suppose now we know the reasons for the removal of history books from the US curriculum. A fact that, has left a large swathe of the US citizenry without a grasp of history. But Adesoji Speaks Knowledge is a place where we try to reframe the narrative. So here's a quick lesson on Latin America. The United States often cites the Monroe Doctrine as cover that they will not allow any adversary in its backyard. Washington went about toppling governments considered not serving its interests. And I'll give you a couple of CIA or the School of America's inspired regime changes. In 1954, the CIA backed the coup of Jacobo Arbenz in Guatemala. In 1964, it was the turn of João Goulart in Brazil. 1972, September 11, 1972, it was the turn of Salvador Allende. In 1984, Maurice Bishop bore the brunt of American imperialism. 1989, it was strongman Manuel Noriega in Panama. In the 1990s, Jean-Bertrand Aristide would feel the brunt of the American power. And these are just a few. But it's important to note that those interventions have left a rippling effect that now echoes from history and forms the reason why you have migrants at the US border. Mr. Prince goes deep and mentions Africa repeatedly in his submission. So here is the African take. Following the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885, where the imperialists, the United States, Germany, UK, Portugal, Spain, Holland, all divided Africa without any recourse as to their native laws and customs, visited barbarism on the place. Barbarism as noted by the Hereros and the Namas in Namibia at the hands of Germans, the Madis in Sudan, the Mashonas and the Ndebele's in Zimbabwe, the Gikuyus in Kenya in the hands of the British, the Chaguan Islands, now an Air Force military base, which essentially means Britain giving someone else's territory to the United States, Guinea, Togo, Burkina Faso, Niger, Algeria, suffering in the hands of France. After that, we had a continent of 54 manufactured countries, one disputed territory, 29 islands, 5 of which are still being occupied by imperialist powers, was the result of that silly conference in 1884-1885. So when Mr. Prince says, and I quote, "You can pretty much say that about all of Africa. They're incapable of governing themselves. It's not hard to see why. Because you've created societies not in consideration of the local population. Those contraptions have continued to create, to brew up problems even till today. I mean, if you discount King Leopold's atrocities in the Congo, or the German atrocities which I have spoken to earlier in Namibia, or that of the British creating the second concentration camps on the continent in Kenya, US will step into the breach because it couldn't possibly wait for the Europeans to leave Africa to take control. One might ask the question, why? Resources. But how do you do it? With, African Americans and Africans in concert with each other? The US decided, Pan-Africanism had to go. Why? Because it was inspiring African Americans fighting for civil rights. And then also coming onto the continent in the likes of Paul Robeson, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., Kwame Ture, Fannie Lou Hamer, John Henry Clark, and W.B. Du Bois, to mention a few. In terms of organization, the Black Panther Party actually had offices in Algiers. So it was imperative for the United States that black unity had to be curtailed home and abroad. So you begin to see why the likes of Mr. Prince will come out from time to time and spout all this nonsense. So to disrupt this black unity, the United States, came up with a system called the Counter-Intel-Pro in the United States. And the recapture of Africa in the shadows. Why in the shadows? Because for it to be done, the likes of Mr. Prince will never be able to see it. And so would continue to live in that myth that the United States is, all bells and roses. On the African continent, the US then used the Red Scare, its popular rules of choice, to destroy, fomenting trouble, backing rebel groups, to destroy that black determination. Because we can't possibly allow those pesky natives to tell us where they need to be. And so when you hear statements like they couldn't govern themselves, you have to say, wow, really? I mean, we've not even mentioned the assassination of the democratically elected Prime Minister, Patrice Lumumba, in 1961. In cahoots, that is the CIA in cahoots with the Belgians. And then subsequently, before then, splitting the country, there was a country named Katanga, which was a way the Belgians could maintain their control over the Congo. And so if you hear stories emanating from the eastern side of the Congo, Katanga used to be in the east, which is the resource-rich region of Congo. So if you hear in the news, that's the source of the problem. Of course, the UN stepped into the breach. But again, the imperialist powers could not allow the UN to be used as a tool for determination, which led to the death or the plane crash of Dag Hammarskjöld in September 1961. 63 years on, we're none the wiser as to what transpired, what led to the plane crash. And Dag Hammarskjöld's crime was, stating on the floor of the United Nations that he believed 1960s to be the year of Africa. What nonsense. the imperialist powers would have said. And when all problems are created, they also come with a solution. The solution was to station a peacekeeping force in Congo. And that peacekeeping force happens to have been, or still is, the longest serving peacekeeping force in the world. And Congo is still not settled till today. Yes, Congo is still not settled. Oof. I mean, I could go on. The investigation into the plane crash of the UN Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld is still an open one. But I don't think we would get to the bottom of it as long as the United States, the UK, and South Africa do not open their archives. And speaking of archives, now we know why Kwame Nkrumah was ousted on February 24, 1966. Because it was facilitated by the CIA as payback for his 1965 book, Neocolonialism, The Last Stage of Imperialism. The book was so upsetting to the US State Department that a note of reprimand was sent to Nkrumah. And a previously promised economic aid package to him in the sum of $25 million was withdrawn. I mean, I could go on. But that's just a couple of series of foreign interventions in Africa that the US has directly or indirectly been aware of from the 1960s and beyond. But some will say that was a long time ago. The United States has many military bases on the continent. Somalia in 1993 was the first time they actually showed their hand on the continent. And we all saw how that went. So now it's proxies, war through proxies. And if the hands are forced, as in the case of Kenya, we will lay the place to waste. You know, I've enumerated a couple of scenarios here. But the question that often pops up is, why does Africa not use its resources to benefit its people? Well, you have to go back into the setting up of the Atlantic Charter, or the likes of the UN, the World Bank, the IMF, the General Agreement on Trade and Tariff, which eventually became the WTO, how the economic system has been rigged in favor of the North. Walter Rodney's book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, gives you a very simple walkthrough of why the underdevelopment is not a natural feature of Africans, but the continued imperial extractions from the continent, a practice that continues up till today. I mean, some would say, but Africa gets back charity. Yes. Bless the heart of the West. That charity is often caught up in unbridled corruption. I would enjoin people to read The Lords of Poverty to show you how the international aid business operating in Africa administers aid to so-called poverty-stricken third world countries. Sankara once posed the question, show me one success story. And all he got back in return were crickets. Because he knew the economic backwardness was one that was imposed by the imperialists in order to extract Africa's resources. So I suppose the question would be, or the next logical question is, what do? We do what we've always done in the past, which is to confront lies, misinformation, and now the resurgent white supremacy. The Africans on the continent and Africans in the diaspora now need to reignite those close ties that used to exist between the likes of Mandela and Nkrumah, Robeson and Du Bois, amongst others, and to get us working for our collective liberation. Because I think that is the only way we can survive. I don't need to underscore that the struggles of Africans and those in the diaspora, on both sides of the Atlantic, in fact, have more in common than we care to admit. One thing I have noticed is white supremacy has a way of operating on a global scale. I mean, in the full video, you could see Mr. Prince invoking the names of the Italian Prime Minister, the President of Argentina, that of Hungary, and the Dutch Prime Minister Geert Wilders. There's no consistency. If you look at their policies, it is exactly what it is, written on the tin. White supremacy 2.0. So Africans have to do likewise. We need to pull together and be unapologetic about it. And we don't need to reinvent the wheel because we have the blueprint. Cheikh Diop, in his book, Black Africa, the Economic and Cultural Basis, Cheikh Diop provides us with a 14-point plan. Clear, concise, which aims at the restoration of the historical consciousness of Black and African people. And of course, the complete recovery of political sovereignty in a post-colonial world. Yes, the West will do what the West does, which is continue to sell mythological stories in avoidance of accountability and responsibility. Because the only thing it does well is genocidal killings, pillaging. I mean, Europe's history in Africa is dark, really dark. Because you just need to open it up. Shows of what it used to be. The stories of displaced, enslaved, and killed populations across the continent. So we're now back at Chinua Achebe's proverb regarding the lions. Africans and those in the diaspora are the lions, and we must tell our stories one at a time. Correct misinformation wherever we see it, but tell our stories we must. The tools are available. Social media now forces a crucial reckoning with a past that still echoes in our collective psyche. But that reckoning compels us to acknowledge the exploitation and the brutality of the West. Again, we have the blueprint. Our ancestors have already done the heavy lifting. We simply just need to return to the source. We need to return to the source. So if you like, please like, share, and subscribe, and do all the good stuff. As I come to the closing, I would like to leave you with the words of poet Livette Middleton. Which says, as you lose your history, you lose your power. So sharpen your eyes and tune your ear so you will know what you see and understand what you hear. I hope we've seen and understood what Mr. Prince was trying to tell us. And I hope this video has done a bit to correct the anomaly. So please leave your comments as it helps improve the podcast. Do, once again, like, share, and subscribe to Adesoji Speaks Knowledge. Till next time, I will say peace.